As I drove down that winding, deserted road late at night, the thick canopy of trees overhead blocked out even the faintest glimmer of moonlight. My headlights cut through the darkness like knives, illuminating only a narrow strip of the pavement ahead. The deeper I ventured into that isolated stretch of road, the more I became aware of just how alone I was. There was no sign of life, no distant farmhouse lights, no other cars, just the oppressive darkness and the whispering of the wind through the trees. It started as a gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach, a growing sense of unease that I couldn't shake off. The further I drove, the stronger it became, until every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to go back the way I came. But there was something about the road ahead that drew me in, something I couldn't quite place. I felt like I was being pulled forward, like a moth to a flame, even though I knew deep down that nothing good could come from it. I didn't recognize the area at all. I'd driven through these parts before, but this stretch of road was completely unfamiliar. The trees seemed to press in closer as I drove, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands, almost as if they were trying to trap me. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles white, as I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination running wild. And then, in the distance, I saw it. A faint, eerie red glow, barely visible through the dense trees. It flickered like a dying ember, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to dance and writhe along the ground. My heart began to pound in my chest as I realized I was approaching a crossroads. I hadn't seen it on my GPS, and it wasn't marked on any map I remembered. It was just there, waiting for me. As I neared the intersection, the feeling of dread intensified. It was like the air had thickened, making it hard to breathe. My instincts screamed at me to avoid that crossroads at all costs, to turn back and drive as fast as I could in the opposite direction. But I couldn't. My foot hovered over the brake, but something held me back. Curiosity, fear, something I couldn't name. The only light guiding me was the narrow beam of my headlights and that strange red glow in the distance. I slowed the car almost to a crawl, inching closer to the crossroads, each second stretching out like an eternity. The tension in the air was palpable, a heavy, suffocating presence that made my skin crawl. I didn't know what awaited me at that crossroads, but as I approached, one thing became clear. I was about to find out. The moment I reached the crossroads, I knew something was terribly wrong. The red light I'd seen from a distance was no ordinary streetlight, nor was it the taillight of another car. It hovered in the dead center of the intersection, pulsing with an unsettling rhythm, like the slow, deliberate beat of a heart. It wasn't a steady glow, either. Each pulse seemed to send ripples of light through the darkness, making the shadows around it quiver as if they were alive. I brought the car to a stop, unable to tear my eyes away from that light. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The world around me had gone eerily silent, as if every creature in the woods was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The red light was mesmerizing, yet deeply wrong, and the longer I stared at it, the more I felt an inexplicable sense of dread creeping over me. It was as if the light was drawing me in, compelling me to focus on it and nothing else. I leaned forward slightly, squinting through the windshield, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The light wasn't stationary. It was moving, almost imperceptibly at first, but then with more deliberate, flowing motions. As I watched in growing horror, it began to shift and contort, stretching and compressing until it started to resemble something humanoid. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a light. It was a creature, made entirely of that strange, pulsating red glow. It stood in the middle of the crossroads, vaguely human in shape but without any discernible features. No face, no limbs, just a tall, distorted figure of pure red light. And it was watching me. My breath caught in my throat as the creature seemed to tilt its head, as if acknowledging my presence. The air inside the car grew stiflingly hot, and I could feel my pulse racing in my ears, matching the rhythmic pulsing of the creature's light. I was frozen, trapped in place by the sheer terror of what I was witnessing. The creature didn't move closer, didn't make any threatening gestures. Yet the menace in its presence was unmistakable. It was as though it was waiting for me to make the first move, to do something that would seal my fate. For what felt like an eternity, I just sat there, my mind racing as I tried to figure out what to do. Should I drive forward? Reverse? Get out of the car and run? But no matter what option I considered, they all led to the same terrifying conclusion. There was no escape. The creature had found me, and it wasn't going to let me go easily. I could feel its gaze. If it even had eyes, boring into me, a palpable pressure that made my skin crawl. The light flickered slightly, almost as if it was laughing at my fear, taunting me. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe properly. I was paralyzed, caught in the grip of a horror unlike anything I'd ever known. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature began to fade. The red light dimmed, the pulsing grew weaker, and the humanoid shape started to dissolve into the darkness. But even as it disappeared, I knew this wasn't the end. The creature had seen me, marked me in some way, and I had the chilling certainty that whatever it wasn't done with me yet. I knew I had to get out of there. Whatever that thing was, I wasn't going to stick around and find out what it wanted. My hands trembling, I slammed the car into gear and hit the gas, desperate to put as much distance between me and that crossroads as possible. The tires screeched on the pavement as I sped away, my heart pounding in my chest. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror, my blood ran cold. The red light was still there, hovering just behind my car, keeping pace no matter how fast I drove. It didn't seem to be tethered to anything. It floated in the air, pulsing rhythmically, a menacing reminder that I wasn't alone. I pushed the accelerator to the floor, the engine roaring as the speedometer climbed, but the light didn't fall behind. It stayed right there, a constant, unyielding presence in my rearview mirror. Panic clawed at me, making it hard to think straight. I swerved around curves, my hands slick with sweat, but no matter what I did, the light remained. It was as if it was attached to me, a phantom tether that I couldn't break. The night outside my car seemed to close in, the trees blurring together as I sped down the empty road. I couldn't shake the feeling that the red light was toying with me, waiting for the right moment to strike. After what felt like hours, I finally spotted a gas station up ahead. A small, dingy place with a flickering neon sign. I skidded to a stop in front of the pumps, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The red light, however, was gone. I frantically scanned the area around me, but there was no sign of it. It had just vanished, as if it had never been there at all. For a moment, I sat there in the driver's seat, my hands still gripping the wheel, trying to convince myself that it was over. But the fear hadn't left me. It lingered like a shadow, gnawing at the back of my mind. I needed answers, some kind of explanation for what I'd seen. Maybe someone at the gas station would know something. I got out of the car, my legs shaky, and walked inside. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow over the dingy interior. The place was empty except for the attendant, an older man with deep lines etched into his face. He looked up as I approached the counter, his expression guarded. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice gruff. I hesitated, unsure of how to even begin to explain what I just experienced. There was this light, a red light. It was following me, back at the crossroads down the road. The man's face paled instantly, his eyes narrowing. He glanced around the empty store as if expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. "You need to leave," he said abruptly, his voice low and urgent. "Don't talk about it. Just get back in your car and go." "What do you mean? What was that thing?" I pressed, a desperate edge to my voice. But the attendant just shook his head, his expression hardening. "I'm telling you, kid, you don't want to know. People who see that light, bad things happen to them. Just get out of here while you still can." His words sent a chill down my spine, but I wasn't ready to give up. "Please, I need to know." "Go," he snapped, cutting me off. His eyes were wide, almost fearful, as he pointed towards the door. "Before it comes back." I didn't need to be told again. I hurried out of the gas station, my mind racing. As I drove away, the man's words echoed in my head, adding to the mounting fear. What had I gotten myself into? Back at home, sleep was impossible. My thoughts kept returning to the red light and the attendant's warning. Something about this crossroads was wrong, deeply, terrifyingly wrong. I spent the next few days obsessively researching the area, digging through online forums, old newspaper archives, anything that might give me a clue. That's when I found it. The crossroads had a dark history. Dozens of accounts, spanning decades, all describing a red light being that appeared just before some tragedy. A fatal car crash, a missing person who was never found, strange disappearances that were never explained. The descriptions varied slightly, but they all had one thing in common: the red light. And in every case, those who saw it didn't live to tell the tale for long. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin as I read through the stories, each one more horrifying than the last. I realized, with growing dread, that whatever I had encountered that night wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was real and it was dangerous. And now that it had noticed me, I wasn't sure if there was any way to escape it. It started a few days after the encounter at the crossroads. At first, I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, that the red light was just a hallucination brought on by exhaustion or stress. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The feeling of unease that had gripped me at the crossroads hadn't gone away. Instead, it had followed me home, creeping into every corner of my life. The first time I saw it again was in my bathroom mirror. I had just finished brushing my teeth and was rinsing my mouth when I noticed a faint red glow behind me. My heart skipped a beat, and I whipped around, but there was nothing there. Just my dimly lit bathroom, the shower curtain drawn closed, and the door slightly ajar. But when I turned back to the mirror, the light was still there, hovering just over my shoulder. It was faint, barely noticeable, but unmistakable. A tiny, pulsing red, like a distant star in the night sky. I stared at it, paralyzed, until it flickered and vanished. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, a reflection from some electronic device, but I knew better. The red light had found me again, and it wasn't going to let me go. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that red glow, growing brighter and closer. When I finally drifted off, I was plunged into a nightmare. I was back at the crossroads, my car idling in the center of the intersection. The red light was there, but this time it wasn't just a distant glow. It was everywhere, flooding the sky, the trees, the road. All of it bathed in that eerie, pulsating red. And in the center of it all was the creature, its form more defined now, its humanoid shape clearer, more menacing. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing, and when I looked at the clock, it read 3:33 a.m. The room was dark, but I could feel it, the presence of the creature. It was in the room with me, watching me from the shadows. I didn't see it, but I could feel its gaze, heavy and oppressive, pinning me to the bed. I lay there, too terrified to move, until the first light of dawn crept through the blinds. This became my routine. Every night, the same nightmare, the same waking at 3:33 a.m., and the same suffocating sense of being watched. The lack of sleep began to wear on me, fraying my nerves, making it hard to focus on anything else. I stopped going out, stopped seeing friends. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next time the light would appear. It wasn't just at night either. During the day, I started noticing small things. My reflection in windows or mirrors would flicker with a red tint, or I'd catch a glimpse of a red light out of the corner of my eye, only for it to vanish when I turned to look. My phone would glitch, the screen suddenly flashing red before returning to normal. And then there were the accidents, small, seemingly random at first. A vase tipping over, a picture frame falling from the wall. But each time, I'd find shards of glass glinting with a faint red hue. The worst part was the feeling of being watched. It was constant, an unshakable sensation that someone, or something, was right behind me, just out of sight. Even when I was with other people, the feeling persisted, making it hard to concentrate, hard to pretend that everything was normal. but no one else seemed to notice. They'd laugh, chat, go about their day, oblivious to the terror that was slowly consuming me. I began to doubt my sanity. Was this really happening? Or was my mind unraveling? But the red light was real. I could feel its presence growing stronger, more tangible. It wasn't just haunting me. It was hunting me, drawing closer with each passing night. I tried to fight it, to stay awake, but exhaustion always won out, pulling me back into those nightmares, into the creature's grasp. As the days passed, the line between reality and nightmare blurred. The creature wasn't just something I saw in dreams. It was seeping into my waking life, its influence spreading like a poison. And as much as I tried to deny it, I knew the truth. The red light was getting closer, and when it finally reached me, there would be no escape. I couldn't take it anymore. The sleepless nights, the constant feeling of being watched, the creeping insanity that had taken root in my mind. It all had to end. There was only one way to stop this, and I knew what I had to do. The red light had followed me, haunted me, for too long. If I was ever going to be free, I needed to confront it, to face whatever horror awaited me at that cursed crossroads. I waited until the dead of night, the hour when the world is at its darkest and quietest. My heart pounded in my chest as I gathered the few items I hoped would protect me. Salt, an iron knife, a piece of mirror, all the things I'd read about in old books and local legends. They felt like nothing more than trinkets, but they were all I had. The drive back to the crossroads was a blur. The familiar dread settled over me like a heavy blanket as I approached, the oppressive darkness swallowing the beams of my headlights. The road was empty, the trees on either side standing like silent sentinels, their twisted branches reaching out as if to warn me away. But I couldn't turn back. Not now. When I finally reached the intersection, I parked the car and stepped out, my legs trembling beneath me. The air was thick with tension, every breath I took feeling like it would be my last. I stood in the center of the crossroads, the pitch-black night pressing in on all sides. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees, carrying with it the faintest hint of something unnatural, something malevolent. I waited, my breath hitching in my throat, every nerve on edge. The salt and iron knife felt woefully inadequate in my hands, but I clung to them as if they were a lifeline. My eyes scanned the darkness, searching for any sign of the red light, but there was nothing, just the void, stretching endlessly around me. And then it appeared, a faint red glow at first, barely perceptible on the horizon, but it grew rapidly, pulsing with that same eerie rhythm that had haunted me for days. The light moved closer, faster than before, filling the night with its crimson hue. It wasn't just a light anymore, it was a living, breathing thing, a creature of pure, malevolent energy. It enveloped the crossroads, bathing everything in that sickening red glow. I felt the ground beneath me tremble as the creature took shape, towering over me in the darkness. The vague humanoid form was clearer now, more defined, its body composed entirely of that pulsing, burning light. It had no eyes, no face, yet I could feel its gaze piercing through me, reading every fear, every doubt, every sin. I was nothing before it, just a fragile, insignificant speck in the vast, consuming darkness. My hands shook as I tried to steady the salt, forming a circle around me, a barrier I prayed would hold. But as the creature drew closer, I could feel the heat of its presence, the overwhelming power it radiated. The salt sizzled and hissed as the creature's light pressed against it, testing the boundary, probing for weakness. "Why are you here?" I forced the words out, my voice barely more than a whisper. "What do you want from me?" The creature didn't speak. There were no words, no sounds, but somehow I understood. The truth hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. It wasn't just a random encounter. The creature had chosen me, marked me from the moment I crossed into its domain. It fed on fear, on despair, on the very essence of life itself. And now it wanted to consume me, to drag me down into whatever hellish abyss it came from. I clutched the iron knife, feeling its cold, reassuring weight in my hand. But what could I do against something like this? The creature loomed closer, the red light intensifying, filling my vision until it was all I could see. The salt circle began to break, the light seeping through the cracks, eroding the barrier I'd so desperately hoped would protect me. In that moment, I realized the horrifying truth. There was no escape. The creature had been toying with me all along, drawing me back to the crossroads for this final, inevitable confrontation. The light was blinding now, its heat unbearable. I felt myself sinking, my body growing weaker, as the creature closed in. But then, just as I felt myself slipping away, something inside me snapped. A surge of defiance, of sheer will, burst forth. I slashed at the air with the iron knife, a futile gesture, but one born of desperation. The blade met nothing but the hot, empty air, yet the creature recoiled slightly, as if surprised by my resistance. The red light flared, brighter than ever, engulfing me completely. The world around me dissolved into that endless, burning glow. I felt the ground give way beneath me, and I was falling, plummeting into the heart of the light, into the very essence of the creature itself. And then, nothing. The light was gone. The darkness returned, suffocating and complete. I was lying in the center of the crossroads, the night as still and silent as it had been before. The salt circle was broken, the knife lying useless beside me. The creature was nowhere to be seen. I staggered to my feet, my body aching, my mind reeling. Had I defeated it? Or had it simply let me go, satisfied with whatever it had taken from me? Couldn't tell. The crossroads was empty, but the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, lingered. I stumbled back to my car, not daring to look back as I drove away, the night swallowing me whole. The road stretched out before me, winding into the unknown, and I knew deep down that I hadn't truly escaped. The red light, the creature, it was still out there, waiting. And one day it would return for me, or perhaps it already had.